Tune Review print speaking to the blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the National Podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @TuneReview, that is @ CUEANDREVIEW. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@tunereview.com, that is INFORMATION@CUEANDREVIEW.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
This is from The National on Friday the 5th of May 2023, from the news section. Construction begins in Sutherland at first vertical spaceport. This article is written by Jane Cassidy. Construction has begun at the UK's first vertical launch spaceport in Sutherland as the project received a further spending boost. Rocket and Launch Services company Orbex announced yesterday that construction has begun at Sutherland Spaceport in Scotland, making this the first vertical launch spaceport to be built on the UK mainland. It was also confirmed that the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, NDA, will contribute £3 million to support the development of Sutherland Spaceport, completing a public investment package that also includes £9 million from Highlands and Islands Enterprise, HIE, and the Scottish Government, and £2.55 million that the UK Space Agency announced in 2018. Located on the north coast of Scotland, the spaceport will be Orbex's base, using the site to launch up to 12 orbital rockets per year to deploy exploratory satellites. The opening ceremony to mark the start of construction was attended by a number of officials and stakeholders, including Small Businesses Minister Richard Lockhead, UK Space Agency Deputy CEO Ian Annett, HIE's Director of Projects David Oxley, and Melness Crofter's Estate Chair Dorothy Pritchard. Sutherland Spaceport is intended to become the first carbon-neutral spaceport in the world, both in its construction and its operation. For example, peat lifted during the construction will be reused to repair large areas of peatland that have degraded over centuries, and its innovative prime rocket is powered by a renewable biofuel. Chief Development Officer at Orbex, Christian von Bengston, said, "Sutherland represents a new breed of spaceport for a new breed of rocket. This is 21st century agile spaceflight with sustainability at its core." With the construction of Sutherland Spaceport underway, this is an important piece of the puzzle that will make the UK a modern space nation. Just as importantly, we're hopefully also setting the tone for how business can be a force for good, creating jobs and opportunities while minimising the impact on the environment. The establishment of a commercial spaceport in Sutherland is expected to support around 250 new employment opportunities in the Highlands and Islands over the coming years, including 40 jobs in Sutherland and Caithness. Orbex's role in the spaceport is expected to stimulate significant private investment that will benefit the local community through job creation, supply chain opportunities, and other associated economic benefits. In addition to the short-term contracts for local businesses and contractors that will result from construction, Orbex will be recruiting for skilled local jobs to support the operation of the spaceport. The types of roles will span several areas, including facilities and operational management, security, general administration and finance, stakeholder engagement, and launch campaign-related roles. Employment opportunities will be advertised locally when recruitment commences. Economic impact assessments commissioned by HIE conclude that the presence of the spaceport has the potential to generate almost £1 billion in gross value added, GVA, for the Highlands and Islands economy over the next 30 years. HIE Director of Projects Oxley said, "The start of construction at Sutherland Spaceport is an important milestone for the local community and the UK space sector. The prospect of launch is exciting in itself, but for HIE as a development agency, an even greater prize is the economic benefits that this development will bring to our region." Small Businesses Minister Lockhead said, "It is an incredibly exciting time for the space sector, with the first orbital launch from UK soil expected to take place in Scotland later this year." Despite our relatively small country, Scotland plays a leading role in the space sector, with the global market projected to grow to £490 billion by 2030. We are well placed to become Europe's leading space nation by 2030. The space sector already plays an integral part of our daily lives, allowing us to stay connected, predict weather, and monitor the effects of climate change. Sutherland Spaceport and Orbex will play a vital role in providing benefits for our people, our economy, and our planet. I was delighted to visit the spaceport for this important milestone. That article was written by Jane Cassidy. This is from The National on Friday the 5th of May 2023, from the news section. Lost wedding ring found in Fife with toy metal detector. This article is written by Jane Cassidy. A 6-year-old girl has found a lost wedding ring using a toy metal detector bought on holiday. Katie Spence from Dalgety Bay, Fife, saved the day with her toy detector after her dad's school friend lost his wedding ring in a harbour. Dad Scott bought the metal detector in 2012 after Katie's mum, Maria, lost her wedding ring during their honeymoon in Corsica. The toy detector was put in a garage after it failed to find the missing ring. Scott got a call from his school friend Neil Snedden, who had lost his wedding band in Aberdour Harbour, Fife. The white gold ring slipped off his finger when Neil, a trainee NDT technician, was pulling a boat in. Scott said, "Neil phoned me in a bit of a panic, asking if I could give him a hand. We agreed that it would have to wait until the tide went back, and I went down with my daughter. She has this wee metal detector that I bought 10 years ago. When the tide went out, we spent quite a long time looking for Neil's ring, and just when we were about to pack up, Katie started shouting, 'It's beeping! It's beeping!' She got her wee metal detector over the top of it and located it. It was great she found it. It was under a pile of seaweed. The tide had gone out and moved it. I thought it was a needle in a haystack. She's a wee hero." Katie was given a cash reward for her efforts and was so happy she did a little dance on the beach. Neil from Kirkcaldy, Fife, said, "We were searching for about an hour and a half with metal detectors, but I was looking for around an hour before they arrived. It was a great moment. I couldn't believe it." That article was written by Jane Cassidy. This is from The National on Friday the 5th of May 2023, from the news section. Scotland will not be put back in a box, warning to ambassadors. This article is written by Laura Pollock. The SNP's International Engagement Ambassador has written to every British ambassador insisting Scotland will not be put back in a box. The letter also seeks reassurance that the Scottish Government's work overseas will not be diminished due to the UK Government interference. It emerged last month that Foreign Secretary James Cleverly had issued a letter to all UK diplomats with 4 demands on handling Holyrood ministers' foreign visits and discussions. In his letter to British ambassadors, Chris Law, MP, called the latest development a democratic outrage and an unprecedented position, and insisted that Scotland will not be put back in a box. Commenting on the letter, Law said, Every Scottish government since devolution began has worked to strengthen Scotland's international footprint and advance our collective interests, whether that be in securing jobs and investment here in Scotland or working to protect human rights and reduce poverty abroad. I know that British ambassadors and diplomats will recognise these orders for what they are, an outright attack on Scotland's devolved institutions and an attempt to force Scotland back into its box. The Scottish Government's work on climate change, climate justice, human rights and tackling child poverty have proven world-leading and fundamental to all of us. The stakes are too high for our place in the world to be traduced. The MP concluded his letter by asking for assurance from ambassadors that the Scottish Government's work overseas will in no way be diminished. This follows External Affairs Secretary Angus Robertson's letter to Cleverly, calling on him to withdraw the guidance, warning he is concerned at the damage it could do to Scottish trade, cultural exchanges and education, and to the Scottish interests in general. Robertson said he first became aware of the guidance from a newspaper journalist rather than a UK government figure. He expressed concerns over a number of omissions and misleading assertions, telling Cleverly that the guidance would be unworkable. That article was written by Laura Pollock.
From The National, Friday, 5th of May 2023, from the Culture section. Coronation, What are the Honours of Scotland? By Adam Robertson. King Charles III will travel to Scotland for a ceremony later this year where he will be presented with the Honours of Scotland. The King and Queen Camilla will attend a service at St Giles Cathedral for the ceremony. A date is yet to be announced, although Queen Elizabeth performed her Scottish ceremony duties on June 24, 1953, 3 weeks after her coronation on June 2nd. But what are the honours and what place do they have in Scottish history? What are the Scottish honours? The honours are the oldest crown jewels in the UK and is comprised of the priceless crown, sceptre and sword of state. Many will remember the crown sitting atop the Queen's coffin as she lay in state at St Giles Cathedral. The crown was made for James V, who was king from September 1513 till his death in 1542, who first wore it at the coronation of Queen Mary of Guise in 1540. Mary Queen of Scots was the first monarch to be crowned using the new crown and sceptre to give her in 1543. Where are the honours now? The honours can be found in the Crown Room of Edinburgh Castle, where they have been held since 1819. They were removed between 1651 and 1660 in a bid to hide them from Oliver Cromwell's army. According to Edinburgh Castle's website, they were locked in a chest and sealed away following the Act of the Union in 1707. In 1818, Waverley author Sir Walter Scott rediscovered them, along with a mysterious silver wand. What will happen with the honours during the ceremony? On the day of the service, the honours will be taken from Edinburgh Castle to St Giles Cathedral by a people's procession of around 100 representatives from across Scotland. Although limited details have been released about Charles's visit, the 1953 Scottish state visit was part of a week-long tour of engagements. That article was by Adam Robertson. From The National, Friday, 5th of May 2023, from the Culture section. Holyrood Committee treated to Scottish folk song performance by Adam Robertson. A Scottish Parliament committee was treated to a live performance of 2 Scottish folk songs during a meeting on Thursday. The Constitution, Europe, External Affairs and Culture Committee heard from a wide variety of contributors on the impact culture can have on communities. One such contributor was Steve Byrne, the Director of Traditional Arts and Culture Scotland. He asked the committee's convener if there were any rules against singing before giving a rendition of a traditional song he had written himself in Scots. He explained, "Now, that sounds like an old song, but it's a brand new song that was written a couple of weeks ago by me. And it sounds like an old song because it's full of cultural memory and full of place. There's about 7 markers there that would be appealing and make meaning for people from that particular area of Falkirk. I suppose in terms of unmet cultural need, it's about recognising that localism, that local distinctiveness, which ultimately we think gives people a kind of cultural confidence. It's not about nativism, it's about recognising what we have on our doorstep and the strength and local diversity that the distinctiveness, that differences gears us up, disarms us in a way that allows us to engage with cultures from elsewhere, which we're increasingly in communities all across Scotland incorporating other traditions into our own, and that's something that we've done for generations. Byrne was followed by Arthur Cormack, the chief executive of Gaelic arts organisation Fijian Nan Gadel. Although seemingly reluctant to sing initially, saying he hadn't done his warm-ups, he said, "Och, I'm going to do it because I'm not going to let Steve have the upper hand." This is a song which talks about the Isle of Skye where I come from, written by Mary Moore, Nan Oran and Mary McPherson. That was an article by Adam Robertson.
From the National, Monday the 8th of May 2023, from the Politics section. Scottish Government challenged to give date for end of oil and gas use. Report by Hamish Morrison. Climate campaigners are calling on the Scottish Government to set a date to end the use of oil and gas within this decade. Friends of the Earth Scotland made the call ahead of the Government's public consultation on its draft energy strategy and Just Transition Plan closing on Tuesday. The group said the strategy lacked a coherent plan to achieve its aims and urged the Scottish Government to bite the bullet and set a clear direction of travel on how we are going to get there. Along with the demand for a date to end fossil fuel use, the campaigners are also calling for the final version of the strategy to include a rejection of new fossil fuel infrastructure and over-reliance in carbon capture. They also want clarification that the 2030 decarbonisation target will be met solely by renewable energy and a detailed green jobs creation plan with ways for oil workers to switch sector. Friends of the Earth Scotland's head of campaigns, Mary Church, said, "The final destination of this strategy is bold, but there is no coherent plan for how we will get there. If Scotland is to stop missing climate targets, it needs to get off fossil fuels and deliver the wide-ranging transformation needed in public transport, home insulation and renewable generation that can help us slash climate pollution and tackle the cost of living crisis. There is no time to lose. The Scottish Government must bite the bullet and set a clear direction of travel and how we are going to get there. As part of that, we need a clear end date for oil and gas within this decade, and a detailed plan on how affected workers and communities will be supported through the transition. Ministers must stop clinging to the dangerous illusion that carbon capture can deliver the urgent step needed in Scotland's climate efforts, and focus on delivering a fully renewable energy system by 2030. Profit-driven energy bosses have long failed to deliver an energy system that works for households or creates enough decent green jobs in Scotland. Hamza Yousaf must build on his promise to take stakes in future offshore wind projects and make sure that a public energy company is set up to swiftly share the benefits of our energy resources more fairly and drive the just transition. The Scottish Government has been contacted for comment. And that article was by political reporter Hamish Morrison. From the National, Monday the 8th of May 2023, from the Politics section. Exclusive. Scottish Labour anger as David Lammy refuses to repeal Public Order Bill. By Steph Braun. An ex-Labour MSP has said David Lammy is living in cloud cuckoo land if he thinks not repealing anti-protest legislation rushed through by the Tories will win Labour an election. Neil Findlay, who was a Labour MSP for 10 years, has blasted his party after Lammy said they would not reverse the Public Order Bill if they were to form a government after the next general election. Ex-Labour member and current SNP MP Tommy Shepherd has also criticised the move, saying it shows a party that was once about reform and change has now become the mass party of the establishment. Current Labour MSP Monica Lennon encouraged party members to make their voices heard on the issue, as she insisted the way to win an election was by being bold and progressive. The bill, which was rushed through Westminster ahead of the King's coronation but does not apply to Scotland, will include a 12-month prison sentence for protesters who block roads and a 6-month jail term or unlimited fine for anyone who locks onto others, a building or an object. Police are also permitted to stop protesters they suspect are out to cause disruption. Lammy, the party's Foreign Office spokesperson, told LBC it would take up too much parliamentary time to repeal the law and Labour can't come into office picking through all the Conservative legislation and repealing it. His comments have sparked uproar, with voters wondering why they should put an X next to the Labour candidate if the party is going to leave the damaging Tory policies in place. Reaction in Scotland. Finlay said the right to protest is an intrinsic part of any democratic society, and insisted it would be daft for any Labour government to suggest they won't go back on it. He told The National, David Lammy's comments were woeful. Lammy should read the history of the party he's a leading member of. The right to protest is an intrinsic part of any democratic society and has been exercised by socialists, trade unionists, and campaign groups for hundreds of years. To say an incoming Labour government wouldn't unpick the worst Tory legislation is frankly daft. It is the duty of any incoming government to get rid of the rubbish passed by its predecessor. If this is the approach he thinks will win an election, he's living in cloud cuckoo land. Finlay has been highly critical of his party in recent years, having previously slammed a poisonous culture among Labour MSPs with their hard unionist agenda. Lennon, who has been a Labour MSP since 2016, said her party should be offering a progressive agenda in order to achieve a comfortable majority, and encouraged members to make their voices heard if they're unhappy with Lammy's stance. She said, there is a process for deciding the Labour manifesto for the next election, and party members should make their voices heard. Many people will rightly expect a Labour government to act differently from the Tories, who have curtailed the right to protest and the right to strike. It is through offering bold and progressive change that Labour will attract support and achieve the comfortable majority needed to govern with confidence. Over the weekend, dozens of people were arrested for protesting against the King's crowning, including Graham Smith, the chief executive of anti-monarchy group Republic. Shepherd, who was Assistant General Secretary of Scottish Labour under John Smith, said Labour could easily snatch defeat from the jaws of victory if they continue with their lack of ambition. He told The National, I think it's sad really that a party that was founded as a great mass party of reform and change has become the mass party of the establishment. This is further evidence that the lack of ambition in the Labour Party to change anything is deeply uninspiring and a fragile edifice on which to build a campaign for government. The only reason Labour are ahead in the polls is because people want change, and if Labour keeps saying they're not going to change anything, they could easily snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And that article was an exclusive by Steph Braun. From The National, Monday the 8th of May 2023, from the comment section, 10 hours of agony was worth it for the fun and the money. By columnist Kirsty Strickland. Have your calves, knees and thighs ever been struck with a considerable force by a hammer or other heavy object? That's what it feels like to walk 23 miles. The Kilt Walk is Scotland's largest walking event. 4 sponsored walks take place annually. The Aberdeen Walk is held in June, Dundonians will get the opportunity to take part in August, and the final one is held in Edinburgh in September. More than 120,000 gallus souls have taken part in the various Kilt Walks over the last 7 years, and raised more than £37 million for charity in the process. Just over a week ago, I took part in the Glasgow Walk, and I survived to tell the tale, just about. We got off to a promising start, though the biblical rain did seem an ominous sign of what was to come. The matching ponchos that my boyfriend and I had donned attracted some stares, but I'm sure folk were just admiring how well prepared and disarmingly stylish we looked. It was around mile 7 that I started to experience the 5 stages of grief. Denial was first up. Surely the signs must be wrong, I thought. We'd been walking for hours and it felt like a cruel oversight that we weren't yet into the double digits. Anger quickly followed. Will this rain ever stop? My feet are wet. What sociopath designed Portaloos? Why have we, as a society, agreed that a tiny plastic coffin that looks like something out of Trainspotting is an acceptable place to spend a penny? Depression followed, and that stage made up the bulk of the trudge towards Loch Lomond. I can't do this, I thought. It's too far. My body has been crafted from beef hula hoops and cheese. It's not cut out for any form of endurance exercise. Acceptance did follow these stages, but it would perhaps be more accurately described as resignation. The only way was to go forward, onward to the end, despite the increasing stiffness in my legs and my ever-darkening mood. There were welcome sights on the way that served as a useful distraction. A group of fighters passed us wearing ingenious rainbow umbrella hats. We were also overtaken by a woman in an inflatable chicken costume. Being outpaced by poultry might have been a low point were it not for the fact that I find silly costumes, particularly inflatable ones, a cheering sight in all circumstances. We were overtaken once more, can you sense a theme here, by two women who were dancing to the 1990s classics blazing out from one of their backpacks. It was clear most people had either undertaken some sort of training before the event or, annoyingly, were just the kind of folk that incorporated exercise into their overall lifestyle and were therefore much better equipped than me for the challenge we had collectively embarked on. At various points, there were lovely volunteers gathered to cheer the walkers on. They shouted out words of motivation which were very much appreciated. Although I did scowl every time one of them helpfully informed us how far there was to go, as my boyfriend was under strict instructions not to give me information on our progress until it was less than a mile. On the way, we did encounter a few participants who appeared to be feeling the pain as much as I was. The only people we ever overtook were the walking wounded, those tending to shredded feet and stretching out legs that seized up in protest. It will come as a surprise to absolutely nobody that I am not the easiest person to walk 23 miles with. As we passed the halfway point, I needed songs, cuddles and a regular supply of sweeties to stop me from sitting down and not getting back up again. Never was the temptation to simply give up stronger than when we passed a team of girls who were sitting on the pavement and checking the bus times to get back to Glasgow. They'd obviously decided their weekend would be better spent drinking Lamborghini with their feet up, and honestly, who could blame them? The last mile felt impossible. By this point we weren't walking so much as shuffling. My legs felt like they were encased in concrete. I was cursing whoever came up with the idea to do this, me, and trying to assess precisely how much agony I'd be in the next day. A lot. But we did it. It took us nearly 10 hours, but we got there, and we raised more £750 for our respective charities in the process. Don't let my whining about sore legs stop you from signing up if you're considering doing one of the upcoming walks. Despite the aching limbs, it was great fun. Learn from my mistakes though. Remember to eat a few vegetables and do some preparatory meandering before the big day, and you'll be grand. And that was our comment piece by Kirsty Strickland. From the National, Tuesday the 9th of May 2023, from the Culture section. Back in the day, will the full truth of the HMS Dasher tragedy ever be known? Report by Hamish McPherson. Continuing our series in Scottish mysteries, I will today be chronicling one of the biggest mysteries of the Second World War in Scotland, the explosion of HMS Dasher in the Firth of Clyde on May the 27th, 1943. The converted aircraft carrier blew up and sank in just 8 minutes with the loss of 379 men out of a complement of 528. In terms of fatalities, it was the Royal Navy's second biggest loss in home waters during the war, although considerably fewer died when the battleship HMS Royal Oak was torpedoed in Scapa Flow with the loss of 835 of her crew. I have written before about HMS Dasher elsewhere, but I have carried out further research, so today I'm going to concentrate on the mysterious aspects of its loss and the very mysterious goings-on that happened afterwards. The disaster remains a conundrum for two main reasons. One is the cause of the explosion, which has never been fully determined, and another is what happened to the bodies of the crew who died, an issue which is still causing controversy 80 years on. There's a further mystery connected to the sinking. Was the body of one of its crewmen used in the famous Operation Mincemeat that fooled the German intelligence officers into the wrong conclusion about the Allies' strategy in the Mediterranean? As I've written earlier in the series, my task is simply to reveal that the facts are to be known about a mystery. Please draw your own conclusions, but be assured that much of what is known about HMS Dasher's loss and its aftermath remains mysterious and probably always will be. The facts about the sinking have never been fully established. What is known as the HMS Dasher was an American-built merchant ship, an important point to remember, converted to an escort carrier, which entered service in 1942 and took part in Operation Torch landings in North Africa, before being deployed on escort duty in the North Atlantic. Badly damaged in a fierce storm near Iceland, Dasher limped to Dundee for repairs to a massive gash in its hull. Witnesses said the American welding came apart mid-storm, before heading for the Firth of Clyde via Scapa Flow. Her new captain, Lennox Albert Knox Boswell, had been in command for just 3 weeks when he led the carrier in flying exercises between Ardrossan and Broderick in Arran on a fine spring day. Some 5 miles south of Little Cumbria, at 4:40 p.m. on March the 27th, 1943, HMS Dasher suffered 2 explosions, the second of which was massive, blowing off the flight deck and armaments and immediately causing the ship to list. The blast was heard many miles away in Greenock, and observers at Ardrossan feared the worst. Water rushed into the vessel, which also spilled thousands of gallons of blazing fuel. The crew rushed to abandon ship, but many were trapped inside Dasher, while a large number of those who jumped overboard were burned by the oil or suffered hypothermia in the freezing sea. From the commanders of the forces in the Clyde, a Royal Navy priority signal was sent. All vessels put to sea immediately. Major rescue operation involving Royal Navy aircraft carrier HMS Dasher. Ship reported sinking. Dasher was indeed sinking and did so quickly, the remains of her deck spearing high into the sky as she slipped vertically beneath the waves in 500 feet of water. Rescue efforts continued into the night, but only 140 men were saved, including the captain. Fewer than 30 bodies were recovered. It was a catastrophe, and one which very few people know about. The Navy did not want the Germans to know it had lost one of its only 3 remaining escort carriers, so a complete press blackout ensued. The first newspaper report of its loss only came in 1945, while survivors were given strict orders not to discuss the sinking, not even with their families. 1 or 2 families did talk, and people around the Firth knew what had transpired, but draconian laws and secrecy were invoked to silence people. To me, this is the start of the mystery. Why was such a total clampdown on information imposed so quickly? Surely the bereaved families had the right to know what occurred. If you want to know how devastating it was for them and their descendants, please go to the website of the HMS Dasher Association and read the heartbreaking accounts of many people still being affected by the disaster and its aftermath. Bodies floated into shore for many days afterwards, but it is presumed that the vast majority of the crew went down with the ship, and the wreck is now classified as a war grave. There was also an issue with the body count. People in Ayrshire said that many more bodies were found than were admitted to, and there has long been a claim that many of those bodies were buried in a mass grave. The Royal Navy has always denied this, and no firm evidence of such a mass grave has ever been found, but it is still part of the mystery around Dasher's aftermath. A board of inquiry convened 2 days after the Dasher went to her watery grave, the meeting taking place on Dasher's sister ship, HMS Archer. Here's the second mystery. Although there were no eyewitness accounts, the board found that a naked light, a cigarette, a spark, had set fire to aviation fuel, which in turn spread to the main oil tanks. There had been tens of thousands of gallons in both. A crash involving a landing Swordfish aircraft was discounted, and there was very little discussion of what were obvious design or procedural faults, though within days the Royal Navy secretly issued instructions to its carriers to carry less aviation fuel in future. Any forensic examination of the events has to conclude that either the Royal Navy got it wrong with its process for handling fuel, or the American shipbuilders and designers who converted the merchant vessel Rio de Janeiro to the escort carrier HMS Dasher were badly at fault, or perhaps it was a bit of both. The other mystery is Operation Mincemeat, the subject of the 1956 film The Man Who Never Was, and a recent version starring Colin Firth. The official version still stated by the UK government is that the body of Major William Martin, found by German agents off the coast of Spain, was that of a Welsh indigent alcoholic, Gwynder Michael. But the case has been strongly made that the body was a drowned crew member of HMS Dasher, John Melville. The more I have looked into this, the more I am convinced it was Melville's body which was used. To me, there is another, simpler version of why the Dasher's loss was suppressed so heavily by the government for so long. The arguments already mentioned about whether the US designers or the Royal Navy operatives were at fault could have been a real threat to that special relationship between the US and the UK. The fact that the Navy took steps to change the way fuel was stored tells me they did not want to insult the American shipyards that were vital to the war effort. The mysteries of HMS Dasher continue to emerge in the public domain and were even discussed in the House of Commons in March on the 80th anniversary of the sinking. Patricia Gibson, the SNP MP for Northanger and Arran, secured a debate in the Dasher and particularly the missing bodies issue. She concurs with my view that the special relationship was at the centre of government thinking. Gibson told the House, At the time, the Westminster government ordered a complete news blackout for fear of damaging morale and fearing questions as to whether or not faulty US construction could have been a factor in the tragedy. Local media were ordered to make no reference to the event, and survivors were also ordered not to discuss the events of that day. As a result, the many lives lost and the bravery of the crew and rescue teams have not always been acknowledged as they ought to have been. There has been speculation that the authorities ordered the dead to be buried in unmarked mass graves, but none has ever been found. The Royal Navy insists that a mass unmarked grave would have been against the Admiralty policy, and that all sources relating to the sinking of HMS Dasher are now in the public domain. And DUP MP Jim Shannon said, "Many families of those who sadly passed away on HMS Dasher still have no clarity to this day. They worry that they themselves will be gone, knowing nothing about their loved ones' ending. Some have formed the view that bodies are buried in a mass grave somewhere. Others are convinced that someone somewhere has to know something about what happened." Gibson paid tribute to the work of a constituent to produce the best account of the Dasher sinking. The late John Steele and his widow Noreen spent long years interviewing numerous survivors of the disaster and browsed previously classified documents to better understand the ship's fate. This painstaking work led them to conclude that the ship was never suitable for combat operations and that it was a disaster waiting to happen. Shortly before its sinking, it was found to contravene more than 20 Royal Navy regulations. Significantly, there was fuel splashing around the vessel. It is worth noting that the other converted Rio-class ships had alterations soon after the loss of HMS Dasher, and the amount of fuel permitted on board these ships was significantly reduced. Steele added, "What eventually spelled the end for HMS Dasher was its leaking petrol tanks. Sometimes the sailors could not return to their cabins due to the fumes. Just one small spark could have triggered the explosion, after what the ship took only 8 minutes to sink." Unusually for me, I will leave the last word to a UK government minister, James Heapy, the Minister for the Armed Forces, who concluded Gibson's debate by saying, "As she has set out, the explosion and subsequent sinking of HMS Dasher in the Firth of Clyde in 1943 was the second highest loss of life on a British warship in UK waters in the Second World War. I cannot begin to imagine the depths of sorrow experienced by the families of the 379 men who lost their lives that day, unaware, as they were, of exactly how and where their loved ones had died. Back then, the situation was complicated by operational considerations and, as the Honourable Lady has said, the Admiralty did not want the enemy to know the detail of the sinking of HMS Dasher. We do not know exactly what caused the blast that day, but the Court of Inquiry held in the aftermath concluded, as the Honourable Lady said, that it was most likely the accidental ignition of a built-up of petrol vapour. Subsequently, inadequate safety positions were identified which led to modifications to all the Navy's US-built escort carriers, as well as significant changes in standard operating procedures, including reducing the volume of fuel carried out in ships. As is sadly so common in conflict, all but 23 of those who died that day went down with the ship, and their bodies have never been recovered. So even the Westminster government has admitted that exactly what happened to the HMS Dasher and her crew is still a mystery. And that piece was written by journalist Hamish McPherson.
The National News on Tuesday, the 9th of May. Anti-monarchy group chief says the police lied. An article written by Adam Robertson and Ross Hunter. The chief executive of leading anti-monarchy group Republic has said that the arrest of protesters at the coronation was premeditated. The Metropolitan Police has been heavily criticised over the detentions, with some campaign groups likening it to something you would expect to see in Moscow. It was confirmed last night that the force will be taking no further action against the anti-monarchy campaigners, but Graham Smith said he was considering taking legal action over what he called a disgraceful episode. In a statement, the Metropolitan Police expressed regret over the arrests. Mr. Smith was arrested in central London on the morning of the coronation while unloading signs emblazoned with the slogan, "Not My King," from a van, on the suspicion of being equipped to lock on to an object or building, which the Public Order Act, signed into law last week, made a jailable offence. After spending 16 hours in police custody, Mr. Smith, along with several others, was released pending further investigation. He said on social media last night that the Met will be taking no further action against him or his fellow Republic protesters. Mr. Smith said, "We've just been told that the police will be taking no further action. This has been a disgraceful episode, and we'll be speaking to lawyers about taking legal action. I also expect a full inquiry into why they repeatedly lied to us and who authorised the arrests." Scotland Yard made 64 arrests on Coronation Day, with 46 people bailed after being detained on suspicion of causing a public nuisance or breaching the peace. Last night, the force said the investigation team has now fully examined the items seized and reviewed the full circumstances of the arrest. All 6 have had their bail cancelled and no further action will be taken. We regret that those 6 people arrested were unable to join the wider group of protesters in Trafalgar Square. Speaking to BBC Radio 4's Today programme earlier yesterday, Mr. Smith said Republic had several conversations with the force before the protests and that they were well aware of the plans and had given assurances that they would not be disrupted. He continued, "So they have repeatedly lied about their intentions, and I believe that they had every intention of arresting us prior to doing so." Asked if he felt the arrests were premeditated, Mr. Smith said yes. Culture Secretary Lucy Fraser had defended the Metropolitan Police as having got the balance right, and said arrests were necessary during the international event on the world stage. Mr. Smith clashed with a BBC presenter who suggested people wishing to enjoy the celebrations had a right to enjoy the day, and that this would have been severely curtailed, particularly by noisy protests. Mr. Smith said that's a disgraceful suggestion, and quite frankly this is a political issue, and therefore obviously it's going to face protest. That's not a right in human rights law, and this was a £250 million vanity parade to promote an institution of state. That is not an excuse to rob people of their rights. It's not an excuse to arrest people and detain them for 16 hours because some people want to enjoy a party. He added that law means we no longer in this country have the right to protest. We only have the freedom to protest, contingent on the permission of senior police officers and politicians. And it's my view that those senior police officers were under immense pressure from politicians. I understand that the Labour Party said they wouldn't repeal this law, which is pretty disgraceful if true. This law needs to be repealed. Ken Marsh, chairman of the Metropolitan Police Federation, also appeared on the programme. He said, "We had to take into consideration everything that at that moment is put in front of us, and if individuals intend to cause an incident which will affect others near them, around them, or part of their actions, then we take action to deal with it." Mr. Marsh said his colleagues were lawful in what they were doing and that the situations they faced forced them to take action. Westminster City Council has raised concerns that women's safety volunteers were among those arrested after rape alarms were seized. The Met said it had received intelligence people were planning to use the devices to disrupt the procession. Caroline Russell said that the London Assembly's Police and Crime Committee, which she chairs, will be questioning the Met over the worrying arrests. The Green politician told the Today programme, "It felt like for someone who was trying to protest and trying to do it by the book, it was very difficult to understand what the rules were. It seems absolutely extraordinary that those people who were volunteering, they were out there handing out flip-flops to people who could no longer walk in their high heels because they'd had a bit too much to drink, and handing out rape alarms. It just seems extraordinary that they got caught up in the Met safety net. How? It just feels very odd." The Met said that following the 64 arrests, 4 charges had been brought, including over a religiously aggravated public order allegation and a Class A drugs possession. London Mayor Sadiq Khan has demanded clarity from the force's leaders on the arrests. An article written by Adam Robertson and Ross Hunter. The National News on Tuesday the 9th of May. Coronation viewing figures revealed as the event is dwarfed by the Euros final. An article written by Hamish Morrison. The coronation's viewing figures have been revealed, showing the event was less watched than England's match against Italy in the Euros final in 2021. A peak audience of 20 million tuned in to watch King Charles being crowned at a lavish ceremony in Westminster Abbey on a rainy Saturday, reports the Radio Times. It means the event doesn't crack the top 10 list of Britain's most watched television events. Some 26 million people watched the funeral of Queen Elizabeth, while the coronation's audience was dwarfed by the King's marriage to his first wife, Princess Diana, which drew an audience of 28.4 million back in 1981. And Diana's funeral in 1997 was the second most watched television event in the UK ever, with 32.1 million viewers, just shy of the audience for England's 1966 World Cup victory against West Germany, which was watched by 32.3 million people. The Radio Times reported that the BBC reached a peak audience of 15.5 million viewers, while 3.6 million watched on ITV, with around 800,000 tuned into Sky News. The figures don't include viewers who watched on YouTube or other live streams. An article written by Hamish Morrison. The National Politics on Tuesday the 9th of May. Joanna Cherry warns the Stand of legal action unless demands are met. An article written by Xander Elliotts. SNP MP Joanna Cherry has said she is prepared to take whatever legal action is necessary against the Scottish Comedy Club that cancelled her appearance after saying staff had refused to work the event. Ms Cherry, who has been outspoken in her opposition to gender reform, said she had sought legal advice after the Stand Club in Edinburgh said it would not be hosting her event as planned on August the 10th. In a letter sent to the venue, Ms Cherry's legal team makes clear that the MP will take the issue to court unless they provide a statement and acknowledgement in agreed terms that the Stand has acted unlawfully by discriminating against our client. An accompanying apology, the terms of which would require to be agreed in advance. Restoration of the event on August the 10th, or a date in the Fringe calendar in 2023 at the same venue. The letter goes on. If you agree to these reasonable requests, our client is willing to waive any claim for damages, including for defamation or legal costs. She wishes to make clear now that should she pursue damages, any damages awarded to her would be paid to a charity of her choice. If you're not prepared to agree to the above, our client's intention is to pursue all legal remedies open to her in court. The MP has also published legal advice from top lawyer Aidan O'Neill, KC. In their letter to the Stand, Ms Cherry's legal team states, "The clear and unequivocal opinion of senior counsel and by us is that your decision is unlawful and discriminatory. There is no defence available to you which would or could justify the decision as a matter of law." Ms Cherry's appearance at an In Conversation With event at the Edinburgh Fringe had been arranged by Glasgow-based Fair Play Productions. The Stand, which is owned and operated by Salt and Sauce Promotions Limited, cancelled the event because staff members refused to promote it or work on the date. The Stand has been approached for comment. An article written by Xander Elliotts. The National News on Tuesday the 9th of May. Further disruption to Orkney ferry services after Pentalina grounding. An article written by Ross Hunter. Ferry services on Orkney will be disrupted for a further fortnight following the grounding of a Pentland Ferries vessel. Services between Gills Bay on the mainland and St Margaret's Hope on Orkney are being cancelled until late May, the ferry operator said. The Pentalina ran aground at St Margaret's Hope on April the 29th with 60 passengers on board. No one was hurt in the incident, which is being investigated. Initial reports suggest the ferry suffered from a sudden mechanical failure, the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency said. Pentland Ferries said, "We're grateful for the many expressions of concern and support following the grounding of the Pentalina." The Maritime and Coast Guard Agency and the Marine Accident Investigation Branch investigations are still ongoing. We regret that we're now cancelling all passenger bookings on the St Margaret's Hope to Gills Bay route up to and including Sunday, May the 21st. All booked passengers are being contacted directly. We sincerely apologise for the inconvenience. We're doing all we can to minimise the disruption. An additional Sunday return service has been added to the timetable of the Northlink ferry service between Stromness on Orkney and Scrabster on the mainland until June the 25th. Jamie Halcrow-Johnston, the Scottish Conservatives' business, trade, tourism and enterprise spokesman, said, "This delay will be disappointing news for both Orcadians and for the visitors who make a vital contribution to the island's economy." Lib Dem MSP Liam MacArthur from Orkney said, "Confirmation of this further delay is disappointing, but not unexpected, given the seriousness of the incident last weekend. It's vital, though, that every effort is made to limit the impact on the travelling public, local businesses and the movement of freight. This will require Pentland Ferries to work closely with Transport Scotland and Northlink Ferries in sharing information on future bookings and cancellations. It'll also require the Transport Minister to approve an increase in daily sailings on the Stromness-Scrabster route." An article written by Ross Hunter. The National Politics on Tuesday the 9th of May. Alex Salmond calls for united front when the UK goes to the polls. An article written by Xander Elliots. All parties that support Scottish independence should stand under a single banner at the next general election, former First Minister Alex Salmond has said. The Alba party leader also called for every yes-backing political party to say that it seeks a mandate to negotiate independence for Scotland in the first line of its manifesto. Mr Salmond said the damage done to the SNP brand amid a police inquiry into party finances, which has involved 2 high-profile arrests, made this the best course of action. Speaking at an independence rally which coincided with the King's coronation, Mr Salmond said the Scottish national movement must declare its own independence from any one political party. The movement needs to engage in the thinking, the activism, the policy work, the international initiatives to prepare the nation for independence, he added. To prepare ourselves and the people for that moment when we're approaching our objective and for the democratic struggle which will be necessary to wrestle our independence from Westminster. Secondly, this movement should instruct all of the independence parties to stand for the Westminster election next year all under one banner, to field one single candidate in each constituency and pledge as the first line in each manifesto that we seek a mandate to negotiate independence for Scotland. The reasons are obvious. The SNP brand is damaged, but the independence ideal is not. It's time to downplay party interest and to emphasise the national interest in independence. The reservoir of support born in 2014 is still alive, kicking and waiting to be led. An article written by Xander Elliots. The National Politics on Tuesday the 9th of May. SNP MP writes to the SFA over unacceptable change to the Scottish Cup final. An article written by Xander Elliots. An SNP MP has written to Scots football bosses raising deep concern about the timing of the Scottish Cup final, which was changed to avoid clashing with the FA Cup final in England, according to reports. Both the Scottish final and the other south of the border are due to be played on Saturday, June the 3rd, and both had been expected to kick off at 3 p.m. But 1 month ahead of the game, on May the 3rd, the SFA announced that the Scottish Championship game between Celtic and Inverness Caledonian Thistle would not begin until 5:30 p.m. Reports said this was to avoid a clash with the 3 p.m. kick-off of Manchester United versus Manchester City in the FA Cup final. Now the SNP's Drew Hendry, Inverness's MP, has written to the SFA to express concerns around the reasoning for the decision, the effect it will have on travelling fans, and the message it sends about Scottish football. It's been suggested that the decision was made to avoid a clash with the FA Cup final in England, which, if true, is wholly unacceptable and sends the wrong message about the importance of the Scottish Cup final to fans in Scotland, Mr Henry wrote. Furthermore, this change in kick-off time creates a major inconvenience for supporters travelling from the Highlands. As you're aware, Inverness Caledonian Thistle is playing Celtic in the final, and there are no trains or buses available for fans from Inverness to catch to travel home after the game if it is played this late. This lack of adequate transport arrangements not only inconveniences fans, but also presents a safety risk for supporters who may have to resort to other means of transportation. The Scottish Cup final is the crown jewel of the Scottish football calendar, and the 3 p.m. kick-off time has long been the traditional time for this event. Changing this tradition for the sake of avoiding a clash with the FA Cup final in England is unacceptable, and I would urge you to reconsider the kick-off time to reflect the stature of the game more accurately. If the kick-off time must remain at 5:30 p.m, I would like to request that adequate transport arrangements be made for supporters. This could include, for example, liaising with ScotRail to enable extra trains from Glasgow direct to Inverness that would be specifically for fans and takes into consideration the possibility of the game going into extra time or penalties, and also allowing for potential celebrations on the pitch. As the governing body of Scottish football, you have a responsibility to ensure that fans can travel to and from games easily and safely. To put either of these in jeopardy to prevent clashes with any game taking place in another nation is grossly misjudged, to say the least. I hope you will take these concerns seriously and take appropriate action to ensure that the Scottish Cup final is given the respect it deserves. Celtic had previously expressed its dissatisfaction with the change in the timetable for the Cup final, which will be played at Glasgow's Hampden Park. The club said in a statement, "We're hugely disappointed that the Scottish Cup final has been moved from its traditional 3 p.m. slot, something we don't believe was necessary or in the best interests of both sets of supporters." Additionally, there was no meaningful consultation with Celtic on this matter, in terms of assessing the many issues affecting supporters attending the match, something which is also extremely regrettable. Inverness Caledonian Thistle also expressed disappointment, saying in a statement, "It's certainly not in the interest of both sets of fans, and as we know, our own supporters will be greatly inconvenienced by the travel challenges they now face." With the Scottish Cup final kicking off at 5:30 p.m, it can expect to finish around 7:15 p.m. if there is no need to play extra time or penalties. There is only one feasible train from Glasgow to Inverness after that time on Saturday, leaving at 7:37 p.m. and with a change in Perth. There are no coaches available, according to listings on Trainline. The SFA has been approached for comment. An article written by Xander Elliots. The National News on Wednesday, the 10th of May. An increase in the number of A&E patients being seen and treated within 4 hours. An article written by Jane MacLeod. Nearly 70% of patients at Scotland's emergency departments were seen within the 4-hour target, but waiting times continue to fall below the Scottish Government target. Figures released by Public Health Scotland showed that in the week up to April the 30th, 69.7% of attendances at accident and emergency departments were seen and subsequently admitted, transferred or discharged within 4 hours. It's an increase on last week's 66.2%, recorded in the week ending April the 23rd. However, the 95% target set by the Scottish Government has not been met since July 2020, with 70.2%, the highest of the year, recorded in January. Meanwhile, of the 24,746 attendances at A&E in the week ending April the 30th, 1,950 patients spent more than 8 hours waiting for treatment, while a further 623 waited longer than 12 hours. Health Secretary Michael Matheson said the figures showed a decline of more than 1/3 of patients waiting 8 hours or longer. He said, "We're supporting health boards as they continue to manage the significant pressure that remains on services right across the health and social care system." These statistics show a 33.3% decrease in the number of patients waiting longer than 12 hours in A&E and a decrease of 26.5% in those waiting longer than 8 hours. This is welcome, and we thank staff in all our emergency departments for their outstanding effort every day of the week. The Scottish Government is providing ongoing support to boards in a range of areas, including discharge planning, to ensure patients are seen in the right place at the right time without delay. But Scottish Conservative health spokesperson Dr Sandhesh Gulhane said the modest improvement in waiting times should not be a cause for celebration. The Tory MSP said, "The SNP government is still miles off meeting its A&E targets, and it's fast approaching 3 years since it did so. There can be no room for complacency among SNP ministers as patients continue to suffer in our hospitals week after week." Scottish Labour's Jackie Baillie said, "Issues in primary and social care, as well as delayed discharge, have a knock-on effect in our emergency departments, putting hard-working staff under immense pressure." An article written by Jane MacLeod. The National News on Wednesday, the 10th of May. Islanders demand Minister intervenes over ferry cuts. An article written by Jane MacLeod. Islanders are demanding an emergency intervention from Transport Minister Kevin Stewart, as they warned that service cuts could force them into rationing spaces on ferries. Members of the Mull and Iona Ferry Committee made the plea as a result of CalMac's latest proposed service cuts, which they said means the main ferry serving their islands will be redeployed to cover the service from Oban to Loch Boisdale in South Uist. The committee said it was given just 7 days' notice of the change, which is due to begin in the second half of May, and it has torn up the timetable they rely on. Speaking about the situation in Mull and Iona, Committee Chair Joe Reid said, "We have no option but to consider rationing ferry space. This is where things have got to now. For affected businesses across all the islands, it's now time to start compensating for lost business." Hundreds of millions of pounds have been poured into Port Glasgow to keep Ferguson's afloat, but nothing has yet been offered to all the businesses across the Hebrides who together employ thousands. In a letter to Mr Stewart, Mr Reid and the committee branded CalMac's handling of the situation as chaotic. It warned the change to services will see them strangled, with locals unable to get to the mainland when needed and tourists unable to visit. Mr Reid said, "While ways have been found to maintain current service levels to every other Hebridean island, Mull and Iona are alone in having our only major vessel withdrawn and not replaced with a similar capacity vessel." He told Mr Stewart the changes planned by CalMac would result in about 250 fewer car spaces and nearly 7,000 fewer passenger spaces on boats to Mull and Iona every day. Mr Reid continued, "We're currently unable to book travel on or off the island via Oban until almost June. Pretty much every sailing is showing as full, and not just for vehicles, but for foot passengers also. This is absolutely unprecedented. Our islands are being strangled during the second half of May as a result of this latest deterioration. Islanders cannot leave unless they made arrangements weeks ago. Tourists, absolutely essential to our economy, will be turned away. Our tourboat operators who depend on day trippers from Oban will have their businesses decimated just as the summer season gears up. The Mull Rugby Club may have to cancel its main fundraising event of the year, the Mull Sevens." With the ferry system in utter chaos, Mr Reid said islanders had no confidence the Isle of Mull would return to its usual service at the end of this month. He urged Mr Stewart to hold an emergency meeting with CalMac to try and find solutions to its ferry problems. While Mr Reid said residents on Mull and Iona were loath to make this an island-against-island issue, they questioned whether it was really equitable that every other service is maintained at the current capacity through May, but Mull has its only major vessel removed. Mr Stewart said he fully understands the challenges facing our island communities, and regrettably there have been ongoing technical issues with vessels resulting in delays to the annual overhaul programme and cancellation of sailings. The Minister added, "There are communities which have been greatly impacted, and we fully recognise the need to improve confidence in services." He said the Scottish Government was continuing to work with CalMac and others to improve reliability and resilience across our networks, but stressed operational decisions regarding the Clyde and Hebrides ferry services lie with CalMac. An article written by Jane MacLeod. The National News on Wednesday the 10th of May. NATO exercise involving 4,000 personnel begins off the Outer Hebrides. An article written by Ross Hunter. A NATO training exercise expected to involve more than 4,000 people has kicked off in the Outer Hebrides. The military operation, going by the name of Formidable Shield, will run until May the 26th and involve personnel from 13 NATO allied and partner nations. More than 20 ships and 35 aircraft will take part in the training, including F-35 fighter jets. The Ministry of Defence's Hebrides missile testing range sites on South Uist, Benbecula and St Kilda are also expected to be used in the exercise, which aims to simulate real-world conditions in the event of an attack on a NATO ally. Royal Navy Rear Admiral James Morley, who's serving as the officer in charge of the exercise, said Formidable Shield displays the mutual commitment of NATO nations to defence. Formidable Shield is the premier integrated air and missile defence and live-fire rehearsal in the European theatre and highlights NATO's proficiency in seamlessly integrating allied and partner maritime and air forces into combined operations. The strength and unmatched cohesion of our transatlantic alliance, now at 31 members with the addition of our capable Finnish allies, lies in our mutual commitment to one another and to the deterrence and defence of the Euro-Atlantic area. This commitment shines through in complex, high-end evolutions like Formidable Shield. Live fire rehearsals will be held against subsonic, supersonic and ballistic targets involving seafaring vessels, ground and aviation forces. Formidable Shield was first held in 2017 and has since become a regular event in NATO's training calendar, taking place every other year. The early iterations of Formidable Shield focused on maritime ballistic missile defence, said Captain John Lips, the United States 6th Fleet's commander and officer in tactical control during the exercise. Today, we integrate joint capability from the ocean bottom to low Earth orbit and span all domains to provide for the deterrence and defence of the Euro-Atlantic. Formidable Shield is not merely an exercise, it's the alliance seamlessly demonstrating credible collective deterrence and defence. An article written by Ross Hunter. The National News on Wednesday the 10th of May. Out-of-use care home has been turned into affordable housing. An article written by Lucy Garcia. An out-of-use care home has been turned into affordable housing for young people in the community at risk of and affected by homelessness. Youth homelessness charity Rock Trust has partnered with Almond Housing Association to transform the semi-derelict building in Livingston, West Lothian, into 2 shared living homes, plus a staff facility for the Rock Trust support team. The first residents will move into their new homes later this month. A Rock Trust project worker will be on hand to engage the young people with a new live and work programme that aims to help them into education, employment or training so that they can study or work while they benefit from the affordable rents. Alistair McDermid, Assistant Director of Services at the Rock Trust, said, "We know there is a significant issue with supply and demand of accommodation in the area, which is resulting in large numbers of young people having to stay in unsuitable accommodation for increasingly intolerable periods. We also know that a lack of secure and reliable accommodation is often a barrier to employment. We want to go some way to addressing these issues for local young people." The success of this renovation and the future of the programme itself is down to the commitment of multiple funders and the local community. A group of volunteers from M&G plc spent a day building furniture, painting rooms and sprucing up the gardens ready for the move-in date. Live and Work project worker Katie Holt said, "Many of the new residents will be living independently for the first time, so we'll support them to learn skills such as cooking, cleaning, budgeting, anything to help them make a success of their living situation and help them in the future." Almond Housing Association CEO John Davidson added, "Almond is proud to have been able to support Rock Trust with the launch of this new scheme. We're determined to work with local partner agencies to have real and meaningful impact on our communities, and this scheme is a great example of doing just that." An article written by Lucy Garcia. The National Politics on Wednesday, the 10th of May. NHS boards asked for plans for if junior doctors strike. An article written by Jane Cassidy. NHS boards in Scotland have been asked to draw up contingency plans in case junior doctors go on strike, the Health Secretary said. Michael Matheson told MSPs he's doing everything in my power to avoid a junior doctor strike, which he said would be very disruptive after they voted last week in favour of their first national walkout over pay. Some 71% of the eligible 5,000 junior doctors voted in the ballot, with 97% backing BMA Scotland's strike action. Mr Matheson has already said that their demand for a 23.5% pay increase on top of inflation, taking the total rise to around 35%, is simply unaffordable. Answering questions at Holyrood, the Health Secretary said confidential talks with the BMA are progressing, with the next meeting scheduled for tomorrow. He said he had recognised the strength of feeling among junior doctors and added, "I want NHS Scotland to be a place of choice for junior doctors in working through their career. I'll be doing everything in my power to try and help to avert the risk of industrial action by junior doctors in NHS Scotland." Labour's Jackie Bailey asked him about contingency plans which would be put in place if the strike goes ahead. The Health Secretary said, "I've already asked health boards to put contingency plans in place should we be in a situation where, unfortunately, industrial action does take place, because it will be very disruptive. The nature of what those contingency plans will be is dependent upon any derogations which have been agreed with the Junior Doctors Committee." An article written by Jane Cassidy. The National Politics on Wednesday, the 10th of May. SNP shows a huge lead in a new Westminster poll, but Labour gains ground. An article written by Xander Elliots. The SNP remains by far Scotland's most popular political party, a new general election poll has suggested, although the party is losing votes to Labour. A YouGov poll of 2,800 Scots adults also showed the Tories were leaking votes to the Labour Party. Sir Keir Starmer's party won 28% backing in the survey, up from its historic low of just 18% in 2019's general election. The SNP saw its 2019 support drop 5 points to 40%, according to the pollster. In the poll, which was carried out between January the 23rd and April the 20th, the Conservatives fell back into third place. Their support dropped to 17%, YouGov said, down from their general election result of 25%. Labour's climb in the polls, YouGov said, was not just from one side of the constitutional debate, with it picking up support from yes and no voters. Among those who supported staying in the UK, the party's share went up by 15 points, largely at the expense of the Tories, who saw support fall by 12 points. Meanwhile, among supporters of independence, the party is up 8 points, the pollster said, with the SNP losing the same percentage of voters. YouGov said that while around the same proportion of Scots would back breaking off from the UK as in 2014, when asked about the top 3 issues facing Scotland at this time, just a third of yes voters chose independence. The poll said among these voters, 62% chose healthcare and 53% chose the economy. For 2014 no voters, the poll found 70% chose health, 61% chose the economy, and 42% chose education. Just 4% of those voting to remain in the UK in 2014 chose whether or not Scotland becomes independent as one of the three main priorities. YouGov said Labour was gaining ground among the cohort of yes voters who do not feel independence was a priority right now, and said the party was up 12 points within this group. The pollster said while the SNP still held the majority of those more agnostic independent supporters at 59%, the party was down 12 points since 2019. But those who do see independence as more of a priority right now, the poll said, are far more loyal to the SNP, with 90% backing the party compared to just 4% who said they backed Labour. Commenting on the poll, SNP Deputy Leader Keith Brown said it was brilliant to see that the SNP is still by far the most trusted party across Scotland, but we take nothing for granted. Under Humza Yousaf's leadership, we will continue to work hard to show that the SNP is the only party offering any alternative to the damage of a broken Westminster system. As Sir Keir Starmer drags his pro-Brexit Labour Party to the right to curry favour with the Tories, it's clear that only by voting SNP can the people of Scotland be assured their priorities will always be put first. In every Tory-held seat in Scotland, the SNP are the top challengers. Only by a vote for the SNP can we ensure we lock the Tories out of power at Westminster. However, Jackie Baillie of Scottish Labour said it was clear that Scotland is ready for change and Labour will be the party to deliver it. Voters are sick of the sleaze and incompetence of the SNP and the Tories, but this isn't as good as it gets. Labour can put an end to this cycle of division and decline and focus on the issues that really matter, from the cost of living crisis to the chaos in our NHS. Under Anna Sawah's leadership, Scottish Labour will continue to earn back the public's trust so we can deliver the fresh start Scotland deserves. A Scottish Conservative spokesperson said it was clear increasing numbers of voters are deserting the feuding, scandal-ridden SNP. While the Nationalists are distracted by their own civil war, only the Scottish Conservatives are focused on Scotland's real priorities, the spokesman said. And voters know that in numerous seats up and down Scotland, we are the only party who can defeat the SNP. An article written by Xander Elliots. The National Politics on Wednesday, the 10th of May. Starmer will U-turn on refusal to work with us, says Stephen Flynn. A front-page article written by Adam Robertson. Sir Keir Starmer will backtrack on his refusal to work with the SNP following the next general election, the SNP's leader in Westminster has said. The Labour leader has repeatedly ruled out working with the SNP if Labour does not achieve a majority government. However, with projections following the local elections in England suggesting Mr Starmer's party could struggle to gain an overall majority at Westminster, Stephen Flynn said his party can hold the balance of power. Speaking to BBC Radio's Good Morning Scotland programme, Mr Flynn said, "This is the same Keir Starmer who quite openly dropped his opposition to Brexit. He dropped his opposition to nationalisation. He dropped his opposition to scrapping tuition fees. And he dropped his opposition at the weekend to repealing anti-protest legislation. We know that Keir Starmer is desperate to be Prime Minister. The key thing here is that the Tories have continued to ignore Scotland. Will Labour? Keir Starmer is a man who has broken many of his pledges, not just to the Labour Party, but to the wider British public, in order to try and become Prime Minister. He's not going to walk away from becoming Prime Minister simply to deny many of our asks. The SNP earlier this week appealed to Labour and Lib Dem supporters to lend their vote to the party in a bid to lock out the Tories. Mr Flynn said, "I'm actually quite excited about where we are at the moment, because what we see is a big shift away from the Conservatives in England. But it's a shift that's not going to deliver a majority government for Labour at Westminster, and that very much brings us into play because it affords us the opportunity, the very real opportunity, of holding the balance of power at Westminster. He said that the SNP would be very clear in terms of the issues they want prioritised, which would include the cost of living and to see Brexit rolled back. And of course, we would be very, very keen to see a UK government, particularly a UK Labour government, deliver the powers to Holyrood to hold an independence referendum. Anas Sarwar was confident of a Labour majority as he brushed off Mr Flynn's claim. The Scottish Labour leader told the PA news agency that the English local election results, which saw significant gains for the party, highlighted the demand for change across the UK. And Mr Sarwar said unseating SNP MPs in Scotland will be key to a Labour victory. Speaking at Glasgow Airport yesterday, Mr Sarwar said it's absolutely clear that those results demonstrate that we would have a majority Labour government because there weren't elections in Scotland, Wales and in London. If you add those results across local government results that you saw in England, with what we expect to happen in Scotland, Wales, but also in London, we can deliver that majority Labour government. The conditions of a deal with the SNP would include prioritising the cost of living in policies and handing Holyrood the powers to hold an independence referendum, he said. But Mr Sarwar repeated the refusal to work with the party at Westminster. He said, no ifs, no buts, no deals with the SNP. We're going all out to get rid of this rotten Tory government, all out to get a majority Labour government, and if we fall short of that, the SNP has a clear choice. They can either choose to welcome a Labour government or allow a Tory government. And I dare the SNP to usher in a Tory government and see how Scotland reacts. He added, we're going all out for a majority Labour government, and I believe Scotland will help deliver the seats that help get that majority Labour government. Mr Sarwar also accused Mr Flynn of aspiring to be a replica of Douglas Ross after he called for tactical voting at the next general election. Scottish Tory chair Craig Hoy said Mr Starmer was counting on some kind of backroom coalition or deal to get into Downing Street, adding, Stephen Flynn knows, as voters do, that Labour would cave into SNP demands for IndyRef 2 if that was the price for getting the keys to Downing Street. A front page article written by Adam Robertson.
From the National, Thursday the 11th of May 2023, from the Politics section. Douglas Ross's lack of support exposed in rowdy FMQs moment. Report by Lucy Garcia. Hamza Yousaf used FMQs to point out that Douglas Ross is the least popular elected politician in Scotland, and he wouldn't be taking any lessons from the desperate MSP. The First Minister called out the Scottish Tory chief for making personal attacks against Minister Marie Todd. Personal attacks from a man who is the least popular elected politician in these islands by any poll estimation, he told the Chamber. As Ross signalled that Yousaf's popularity rating was approaching his, the FM responded, the best retort, Ross, is, I'm catching you up. You're still the most unpopular leader, elected politician in this country by quite a country mile. Yousaf's comments sparked applause in the Chamber with heckling from the Conservative benches. It comes after a recent Survation poll, carried out from April the 27th to May the 3rd on behalf of True North, found Ross's approval rating was the worst among Holyrood party leaders at -20. Anas Sarwar, the Scottish Labour chief, was at +5, though only 55% had a view on him. A quarter said he was neither favourable nor unfavourable, and nearly 20% either didn't know or hadn't heard of him. Yousaf's approval rating was also down at -12, as 29% and 41% disapprove of his performance as SNP leader so far. A further 21% said they neither approve or disapprove. And that report was by Lucy Garcia. From the National, Thursday the 11th of May 2023, from the news section, Hainan Airlines to launch only direct flight from Scotland to China. By Daniel Byron. The only direct flight from Scotland to China is said to take flight next month. The twice-weekly route, from June the 26th until October the 8th, will be operated by Hainan Airlines between Edinburgh and Beijing. Prices range from around £750 in economy class to £2,600 in business class for the 10-hour plus journey. Gordon Dewar, Chief Executive of Edinburgh Airport, said, "The return of direct flights to Beijing is fantastic news as we gear up for a hugely exciting summer and is further evidence of the strong recovery we're seeing here in Edinburgh. This service will be the only one operating between Scotland and China when it is introduced, and is a real show of faith in the market by Hainan Airlines. This important connectivity will provide a boost to Scotland's universities and tourism industry, open up a wealth of new business opportunities, and enable better access to other parts of the world. We are sure it will be highly valued, whether it be by students travelling between the two countries to study, families reconnecting, or tourists travelling to visit new places." Transport Minister Kevin Stewart said, "I welcome the announcement of this direct service between Edinburgh Airport and Beijing, which is an important development for both Edinburgh and Scotland's international connectivity. This direct connectivity is great news for people and businesses in both Scotland and China, building strong links for business and exports, as well as making it easier for visitors and students to come and experience Scotland." UK government guidance on flights to China has recently changed. A spokesperson said, "From April 29th, 2023, China has changed its COVID-19 entry requirements for all travellers entering the country. You must undertake a lateral flow/rapid antigen test 48 hours before boarding your flight. Passengers entering China displaying symptoms of fever or with an abnormal health declaration may be asked to undertake a rapid antigen test on arrival. Those who test positive will be asked to wear a mask and may be advised to self-isolate while symptoms remain, although there is no mandatory self-isolation for COVID-19. And that was a report by Daniel Byron. From the National, Thursday the 11th of May 2023, from the news section, Robbie Gibb tried to stop BBC probing £350 million Brexit bus claim, by political reporter Xander Elliards. Robbie Gibb, a BBC board member described as an active agent of the Tory party, reportedly tried to block a journalist at the broadcaster from probing the infamous Vote Leave claim about £350 million of funding for the NHS. Written on the side of the red Brexit bus, the anti-Europe campaign claimed the UK sent the EU £350 million a week, adding, "Let's fund our NHS instead." The claim became one of the most enduring images of the Brexit campaign, but controversy surrounded its accuracy and fact-checking services branded it wrong. But Gibb reportedly attempted to get a BBC journalist to move on and drop an investigation into the claim, and has since insisted that it was not a lie at all. Rob Burley, a former BBC editor, said in his newly published book, "Why Is This Lying Bastard Lying to Me?" that Gibb was horrified by the idea of the bus claim being interrogated. "All that was done," Gibb told me, "it was time to move on," Burley said. He thought that anything that looked back at the referendum would look to voters and attempt to rerun it. It risked giving the impression that the BBC couldn't accept the outcome and wanted to discredit the result. Gibb, who was working as the BBC's editor of live political programmes at the time of the Brexit vote, has since gone on to advise GB News prior to its launch and work as Theresa May's Director of Communications. Speaking for the book, Gibb told Burley, "It's just not true that politicians lie all the time. £350 million was not a lie at all. It's just campaigning. Nobody ever says, what about Labour saying you've got 24 hours to save the NHS, as Tony Blair did on the eve of the 1997 general election. But when it's about Boris Johnson, they do. So I just have no truck with it." Gibbs said, "We spent weeks during the campaign interrogating the £350 million claim on multiple occasions. After the referendum result, there were so many new and important angles to examine." Burley, who was working in the Andrew Marr Show in 2016, ultimately ignored Gibbs' intervention. He said that looking into the bus claim was completely justifiable journalistically. Gibb, the brother of Tory Schools Minister Nick Gibb, has close ties to the Conservative Party. Emily Maitlis, the former Newsnight host, said during the 2022 McTaggart lecture at the Edinburgh International Television Festival that Gibb was acting as arbiter of BBC impartiality. She said he was an active agent of the Tory party and was trying to influence the BBC's output. The latest revelations come after Richard Sharp, A Tory donor installed at the top of the BBC during Boris Johnson's time as Prime Minister was forced to step down after being found to have broken the corporation's code on public appointments. And that report was by Xander Elliards.
That concludes this week's edition of the National Podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels at Q and Review and to tell your friends about our service.